Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We're the place you come to get under the skin of complex topics, breaking down source material into insights you can really use.
And today, well, we're looking at maybe the most incredible learning phenomenon there is. What goes on inside an infant's mind during those first 2 years?
It sounds like we might be exaggerating, calling it the most impressive learning machine, but honestly, the research suggests it's not far off.
It really isn't. The cognitive leaps, the language development, it's just this incredible explosion, a developmental sprint
Yeah.
that nothing later in life really compares to.
So our mission today is to get into the nuts and bolts of that. We want to uncover the mechanisms, from that basic curiosity they seem to be born with, right through to the more formal stages of learning that shape how they actually see the world and start communicating.
Exactly. We're digging into how they perceive things, how they structure information, and how they eventually crack the code of language.
And the big idea framing this whole discussion, the one that really should grab you, is this concept of the eager mind. We need to ditch that old image of a baby just lying there, passively taking things in.
Absolutely. Sources like Luca and Wilburn really drive this home. They talk about how right from the get-go, infants show these perception biases and patterns in what they pay attention to.
Biases that suggest they're not just waiting?
No, biases that suggest they have a fundamental, active drive to get information. They are actively seeking it out. They're motivated learners from day one.
So they're born ready to learn, essentially, almost like they come preloaded with some basic software about how reality works.
That's a great way to put it. They're like these highly specialized data processors ready to apply something, well, almost like a scientific method to make sense of everything around them.
Okay, so we'll get into those rules they use, the stages they seem to go through.
Yeah, and also how memory works when we usually think of infantile amnesia, and of course how on earth they manage to learn language so incredibly fast.
Right, let's start there then. This idea of the baby as a tiny scientist, it's catchy, but you're saying it's more than just a cute phrase.
Oh, definitely. It points to a real neurological process. You see this cycle. They have this innate curiosity, right, that leads them to form a little hypothesis, like, what happens if I drop this?
Okay.
Then comes observation and active experimentation. They actually drop it. Then they analyze the result. It fell. It made a noise. And they draw a conclusion, updating their internal model.
So their whole day is just cycles of this. Test, observe, update, repeat.
Pretty much it's this constant iterative loop. They're relentlessly testing the physical world, the social world. And that intrinsic motivation is why the development happens at such breakneck speed.
And they need tools to gather all that data. Let's talk about the looking and listening toolkit. Auditory input first. They really zero in on human voices, don't they?
They do. And the sensitivity is, frankly, phenomenal. Very early on, they can distinguish between incredibly subtle speech sounds, think like pa versus ba.
Which sound almost identical to many adults, especially if it's not a distinction their own language uses.
Exactly. But infants are tuned into these tiny acoustic differences, like the voice onset time, just a millisecond difference in when the vocal cords start vibrating after you release the air. They pick that up.
But here's the fascinating part. They start out as universal listeners, right? Capable of hearing pretty much any sound distinction used in any human language.
They do. They start with this incredibly broad capacity. But, and this is crucial, that universality gets traded for specialization very quickly.
Okay, what's the timeline on that?
Our sources are pretty clear. By about 1 year old, that ability to distinguish sounds they haven't been hearing regularly, sounds from languages not spoken around them, it starts to deteriorate.
So the brain is actively pruning, getting rid of connections it doesn't think it needs.
Precisely. It's not a loss in a negative sense. It's optimization. The brain is becoming hyper-efficient at processing the specific language environment the child is in. It needs to master that language for survival and connection.
And that loss continues through childhood.
Yes. The specialization solidifies. It highlights just how time-sensitive some of these developmental windows are. If you want a child to effortlessly pick up the sounds of multiple languages, that first year is, well, pretty critical.
So expose them early, the brain keeps the pathways open, wait too long, and the pruning has already made it much harder.
That's the essence of it, yes.
Okay, shifting from listening to looking. The other key tool is gaze following. Babies automatically look where their caregivers look.
And it's more sophisticated than just noticing a head turn. They understand that the direction of someone's eyes signals something important is over there. It's the beginning of shared attention, understanding that looking indicates focus.
And they'll do this even without pointing or someone saying, look.
Research shows they will. They grasp the significance of the gaze itself. It's like an innate understanding. Where the big person looks, that's where the interesting or important stuff is likely to be. It's fundamental for social learning and navigating a complex world.
Okay, so they're actively seeking information, tuning their senses. This connects to the idea of core knowledge, right? The stuff they seem to know from the start.
Exactly. Core knowledge refers to these foundational understandings that appear to be pre-wired. It's a mix of nature, the innate brain structure, and nurture, the environment, confirming these expectations. It gives them a sort of starter kit for physics and social interaction.
Like what kind of things?
Well, basic physics principles seem to be there. Things like unsupported objects fall down, gravity,
Yeah.
moving things stop if they hit a solid barrier. And socially, as we just said, that an adult's gaze points to something significant
And how do we know they know this?
because they show surprise when these rules are violated. If you set up an experiment where a ball seems to roll through a solid wall or an object just hangs in midair, infants will look longer, their heart rate might change. They show surprise.
Ah, so that surprise reaction is the signal. It tells us they had an expectation and it was broken. That's the learning moment.
Precisely. The violation of expectation triggers attention and forces them to update their understanding, their internal model or scheme of how the world works.
Now, perception-wise, faces are obviously huge for babies. There's a specific brain area, the fusiform face area, that gets really good at recognizing faces fast.
It specializes incredibly quickly. But there's a fascinating effect the research points to, the own race effect.
Tell us about that.
It's quite striking. Basically, infants become much, much better at distinguishing between individual faces from their own ethnic group, the faces they see most often, compared to faces from other ethnic groups they see less frequently.
So it's not about prejudice or anything like that?
Not at all. It's about perceptual expertise. The visual system is optimizing itself based on the input it receives most often. If an infant primarily sees, say, Caucasian faces, their brain becomes highly tuned to the subtle differences between those faces, but it doesn't develop the same level of expertise for distinguishing between, say, Asian or African faces it rarely encounters.
So the brain is basically saying, I need to be an expert at recognizing these specific people around me.
Exactly. It's prioritizing the most functionally relevant information for that infant's specific environment.
Which makes sense. Okay, one more point before I move to Piaget. You mentioned this spectrum of curiosity. Even though curiosity seems innate, not all toddlers are the same in how they explore by that second year.
Right. You see quite distinct differences. Some toddlers are just little whirlwinds. They have to touch everything, investigate everything, sometimes with what looks like reckless abandon.
The tiny scientists fully unleashed.
Exactly. And then you have others who are much more hesitant. They'll watch, they'll observe from a distance, maybe approach things very cautiously rather than diving right in.
Does that difference matter for learning?
Both styles lead to learning, but they structure the experience differently. The eager explorer might gather a wider range of data points faster, perhaps. The cautious observer might take longer, but perhaps engage in deeper, more focused analysis before acting. Neither is inherently better, but it shows how temperament interacts with that innate drive to learn.
And that variation in approach, that active engagement with the world, is really what Piaget tried to map out with his stages.
Yes, he wanted to provide a framework for understanding how that active exploring infant mind develops its intelligence over these first couple of years.
So let's dive into that. Piaget's concept of sensorimotor intelligence. What's the core idea?
Piaget saw these first 2 years as the sensorimotor period. Why? Because infants primarily think, using their senses, what they see, hear, touch, and their motor skills, grasping, hitting, moving. They are active learners. And for Piaget, intelligence is this process of adaptation, constantly adjusting their understanding to fit reality.
And adaptation involves two key processes, assimilation and accommodation. Let's break those down. Assimilation first.
Assimilation is, well, it's the easier one. It's when an infant encounters something new and fits it into a mental category or scheme they already have.
Like seeing a different breed of dog, but still recognizing it fits into their doggy category.
Exactly. Or, they have a scheme for things I can suck on, like a pacifier. They get a new toy, they try sucking on it, they're assimilating the new toy into that existing scheme, they're fitting the world into their current understanding.
Okay, simple enough. But accommodation sounds like the heavy lifting.
It is. Accommodation is where the real cognitive change happens. This is when the new experience doesn't fit the old scheme, so the infant has to change or restructure their thinking.
So the new toy isn't suckable, maybe it's hard plastic.
Right, so the suckable things scheme doesn't work.
Yeah.
They experience what Piaget called disequilibrium, a mismatch. They have to accommodate. Maybe they alter the scheme, or maybe they create a new one, like hard things for banging.
And that struggle, that adjustment, that's intelligence growing in Piaget's view.
That's the core of cognitive development for him, yes.
Yeah.
The effortful restructuring of thought.
Now, Piaget divided this sensorimotor period into 6 stages based on these circular reactions. What are those?
Circular reactions are basically actions the infant repeats. They start accidentally, then become intentional habits, and eventually experiments. Piaget grouped them based on what the infant is focused on.
Okay, so the first 2 stages involve primary circular reactions. What's primary about them?
Primary, because the focus is purely on the infant's own body. Stage 1, right after birth to about 1 month, is just the stage of reflexes. Sucking, grasping, staring. These are automatic, innate behaviors. No real thinking involved yet.
Just pure instinct.
Pretty much. Then stage 2, from about 1 to 4 months, brings the first acquired adaptations or habits. Still focused on their own body, but now it's about coordinating actions.
Like figuring out how to get their thumb to their mouth consistently.
Exactly. They might do it by accident at first, realize it feels good or interesting, and then repeat it intentionally. They're learning to control their own body parts in simple, repetitive ways, sucking their thumb, kicking their legs, just to feel them move. Okay, so that's the focus inward. Then we move to secondary circular reactions. The focus shifts outward.
Yes, now the focus is on objects and people in the environment. Stage 3, roughly 4 to 8 months, is about making interesting sights or sounds last.
So, batting at a mobile to make it swing.
Perfect example. They hit it, and maybe accidentally at first it does something cool, so they intentionally repeat the action to get the same effect. The action is on an external object, but the goal is still just repeating that interesting outcome.
And you mentioned mirror neurons might start kicking in around here.
Yes, there's speculation that this stage aligns with the development of mirror neurons, which could help them start linking actions they see others do with their own motor plans. It's a stepping stone towards imitation. But the really big leap happens in stage 4, right? 6 to 12 months. This is where things get purposeful.
Huge leap. Stage 4 is about new adaptation and anticipation. They start using means to achieve ends. This is where we see genuine goal-directed behavior.
So not just repeating something interesting, but figuring out how to get something they want.
Exactly. They combine actions purposefully. Like the classic example is moving a blanket, the means,
Right.
to grab a toy hidden underneath the end. They're thinking ahead, planning a sequence, however simple.
And this is also where object permanence comes in, the idea that things exist even when hidden.
Yes, this is the classic Piagetian milestone for stage 4. Before this, if you hide a toy completely, the baby acts as if it has ceased to exist. Out of sight, out of mind is literally true for them.
But a stage 4 baby will search for it.
They will actively search, indicating they hold a mental representation of the object even when they can't see it. It's a massive cognitive step, the beginning of symbolic thought, moving beyond just what's immediately sensed.
But you hinted earlier there's some debate about this, that maybe they understand it earlier.
Right. This is a common critique of Piaget. Many modern researchers, using different methods like looking time studies, believe infants might grasp the concept of object permanence much earlier, maybe even 3 or 4 months old.
So why can't they find the hidden toy then?
The argument is they lack the necessary motor skills, the coordination to reach, or to pull away the blanket. They might know it's there, but they can't yet perform the physical actions Piaget's tests required. So his stages might underestimate their cognitive ability by relying too heavily on motor performance.
That makes a lot of sense. Okay, so after goal-directed behavior, we get into the final 2 stages. Tertiary circular reactions. These sound more advanced.
They are tertiary, because now the focus is on exploring the properties of objects through active experimentation. Stage 5, from about 12 to 18 months, is the little scientist stage in full swing.
So not just dropping a block, but dropping it in different ways.
Exactly. They drop it from high up, drop it from down low. They bang it on the table, bang it on the floor. They throw it softly. They throw it hard. They are actively experimenting with variations to see what happens. They're fascinated by cause and effect and novelty.
Exploring the possibilities.
Yes, exploring a whole range of activities, figuring out the world through trial and error, but now with much more intentional variation.
And that leads to the final stage of the sensorimotor period. Stage 6, 18 to 24 months. Mental combinations.
This is the culmination. The big shift here is from purely physical experimentation to intellectual experimentation. They can start to solve problems in their head.
thinking it through first.
Yes. They don't necessarily have to try every single action physically anymore. They can use mental combinations, imagining the outcomes. This allows for things like deferred imitation, seeing someone do something complex yesterday and then imitating it today.
Because they held on to the mental representation and could figure out the sequence later.
Precisely. They've internalized actions, they can use symbols, and this capacity for mental simulation is really the launch pad for true language development and more complex thought.
Okay, that detailed mapping of stages makes sense. But if they're learning all this, experimenting, figuring things out, they must be remembering it somehow. Which bumps up against that idea of infantile amnesia.
Right. The classic view, going back even to Freud, was that we don't retain memories from our first year or two. The idea was the brain wasn't mature enough, especially areas like the hippocampus needed for long-term memory, or that we lacked language to structure the memory.
So early experiences were just lost.
That was the thinking. But modern developmental science has really challenged that. The consensus now is quite different. Very young infants can remember, and they do.
Okay, but it's not like they're remembering their first birthday party years later. Right, it's a different kind of memory.
Exactly. We need to distinguish between explicit memory, the conscious recall of facts and events, like remembering what you had for breakfast, and implicit memory, unconscious memory, like skills or procedures. Riding a bike is implicit memory.
And infants have implicit memory.
Oh yes, almost right away. Think about those experiments where a baby learns that kicking their foot makes a mobile above their crib move. They learn that association, that procedure, and they can retain it for days or even weeks. That's implicit memory in action.
But what about remembering specific events or information, even briefly? That explicit kind.
That's where it gets tricky. They can form these memories, but the retrieval process is incredibly fragile and very dependent on specific conditions being met.
Okay, what are those conditions? How do we get babies to show us they remember?
Our sources point to three key things. First, the conditions during learning and testing need to be similar to real life. A weird, sterile lab setup can actually hinder their ability to retrieve a memory. It needs to feel familiar.
Makes sense. Second,
motivation has to be high. They need to be engaged and interested in whatever they learned or experienced. If they didn't care much in the first place, the memory trace will be weaker.
And the third, which you said was critical.
Special measures are needed to activate the memory. Because the neural pathways are still developing, the memory trace might be there, but it's faint. It needs a little boost, a trigger, to be brought back online.
So just storing it isn't enough. You need to help them find it again.
Exactly. And this is where things like reminders, repetition, and retrieval cues become absolutely essential.
Tell me about reminder sessions.
Reminder session is basically giving the infant a brief exposure to part of the original learning situation. Sometime after the initial learning, but before you test their memory fully. It's like a little nudge.
Like showing them the mobile again briefly, but not letting them kick it.
Yes, something like that. That brief reminder seems to reactivate the stored memory trace, making it accessible again when you test them later. Without that reminder, the memory often just seems to fade.
And doing it more than once helps.
Hugely. The research is clear. Repeated reminders are much more powerful than just one. Each reminder strengthens those neural connections, making the memory more robust and less dependent on needing that perfect cue later on. It's like building up the pathway.
And context is also key, especially for the really young ones.
Oh, context is incredibly important, particularly for infants under about 9 months. The memory seems tied very strongly to the specific environment where it was formed.
How so?
If you teach an infant something, say, pressing a lever to make a toy light up in a room with specific lighting, maybe a certain pattern on the wall, if you then try to test their memory for that action in a completely different room, they often fail.
Wow. So they need the original setting to unlock the memory.
It seems so, early on. That specific context acts as a crucial retrieval cue. As they get older, memory becomes less context-dependent. The brain gets better at generalizing information away from the immediate sensory details. But initially, where it happened is almost part of the memory itself.
Okay, so they are remembering just in this very specific, context-bound, cue-dependent way. Fascinating. Now let's switch gears slightly to the other massive achievement of these first 2 years. Language.
Right. If figuring out physics and memory wasn't enough, they also have to crack the incredibly complex code of human language. And like everything else, it starts way earlier than you might think.
Before birth, even.
Yes, the foundations are being laid. In the last trimester, the fetal brain is already organizing itself around sound patterns. They can hear the rhythm, the intonation, the melody of the language being spoken around them, particularly the mother's voice.
So they're already tuning in.
They are. And newborns show an immediate preference for speech sounds over other noises, and specifically for the language they heard in utero. Then, over the first few months, they engage in selective listening, starting to zero in on the sounds that matter.
And by around 6 months, that specialization we talked about earlier, losing the ability to hear all sound distinctions, really kicks in for their native language.
Exactly. By 6 months or so, their auditory system is becoming highly specialized for the phonemes, the basic sound unit of the language or languages they hear consistently. They're also getting better at matching sounds with mouth movements they see.
Okay, that sets the stage for them to start making sounds. Babbling.
Right. Babbling typically starts somewhere between 6 and 9 months. It's the repetition of syllables.
Oh.
You know, the classic ba-ba-ba, ma-ma-ma, da-da-da.
Is it just random noise or is it practice?
It's definitely not random. It's considered experience expectant, meaning the brain is basically wired expecting to do this, assuming it gets some language input. It's a crucial step in practicing the motor control needed for speech.
And does it sound the same everywhere?
Initially, yes. The earliest babbles sound pretty similar across all languages. But interestingly, by around 12 months, the babbling starts to take on the specific sounds, rhythms, and intonation patterns of the infant's native language. It starts to sound like they're trying to speak that language, even without real words.
What about babies who can't hear?
An important point. Deaf infants exposed to sign language will actually babble with their hands, making repetitive hand movements that mimic the rhythm and structure of sign. It shows the drive to practice linguistic units is deeply ingrained, regardless of the modality.
Wow. Okay, so babbling is vocal practice. What about gesturing?
Gesturing is huge, too. All infants gesture, waving, reaching, eventually pointing. And crucially, concepts often show up in gestures before they show up in words.
Meaning they understand something and can signal it with a gesture before they have the word for it.
Exactly. It shows that their conceptual understanding is often running ahead of their ability to produce the complex sounds of speech. Pointing, which usually emerges around 10 months, is a massive milestone.
Why is pointing so significant?
Because it's clearly intentional communication. The baby isn't just reaching for something, they're trying to direct your attention to it. It shows they understand that you have a mind, that you can share focus on something. It's a fundamental social cognitive skill and a key precursor to language.
Okay, so sounds and gestures are building blocks. Then we get to the first actual words, usually around the 1-year mark. But there's a big catch initially.
Yes, the comprehension gap. It's really important to grasp this. For quite a while, from maybe 6 months up to around 15 months, infants understand far, far more words than they can actually say.
Like how much more?
The estimate is often around 10 times more. Their receptive vocabulary, the words they understand when they hear them, just balloons way faster than their expressive vocabulary, the words they can produce.
So they're processing a lot more language than they let on.
Absolutely. Language acquisition is a listening game long before it's a talking game.
Then, around their first birthday, maybe a bit later, they start using those single words, holophrases.
Right. A holophrase is a single word used to express a whole thought or sentence. So a baby saying juice might mean I want juice, or there is the juice, or is that my juice?
You have to figure it out from context and intonation.
Exactly. They're packing a lot of meaning into that one word. And by this point, their vocalizations have clearly shifted from the universal babbling sounds to the specific sound combinations of their native tongue.
And then things accelerate. The famous naming explosion.
Yes. This is usually sometime in the second year. Once a child's spoken vocabulary hits a certain threshold, often around 50 words, it just takes off.
Takes off how fast?
The sources suggest a rate of maybe 50 to 100 new words per month. It's an incredible burst of vocabulary growth. A 21-month-old might easily say twice as many words as an 18-month-old.
Why does it happen then? What clicks?
It seems they finally crack a crucial code, that things have names. Or perhaps that words are the primary tool for categorizing the world and getting what they want. Once that clicks, they go on a naming frenzy. Everything needs a label.
And all of this is happening within a specific cultural context, right? The way adults talk to babies matters.
Immensely. We see variations in what's called child-directed speech, the higher-pitched, simplified way many adults talk to infants. Some cultures do it more than others. The amount of language input, the quality of interactions, it all influences the pace. Infants are quite good at seeking out the best teachers available to them.
And culture even shapes what kinds of words they learn first.
Yes, this is fascinating. There are cultural differences in the ratio of nouns versus verbs and adjectives in early vocabularies. English-speaking kids, for instance, tend to have a noun bias early on, lots of words for objects.
Like ball, dog, cup.
Right. Whereas in some other cultures, like Mandarin Chinese or Korean, you might see a higher proportion of verbs early on, words for actions and relationships.
What does that imply?
It suggests that the cultural focus subtly shapes the very first categories the child uses to organize their world. Are they focusing first on naming static objects or on describing dynamic actions and social connections? It could have quite profound implications down the line.
Which leads us towards grammar, how words are put together to make meaning. When does that start to show up?
You start seeing the seeds of grammar even in hollow phrases through intonation. But it becomes much more obvious between 18 and 24 months as they start putting two words together. More juice. Mommy go. This is often called telegraphic speech.
It's like an old telegram, just the essential words.
Exactly. And developmentalists track this growing complexity using a measure called mean length of utterance, or MLU.
What's that?
It's simply the average number of morphemes, which are meaningful units. Could be a word or a grammatical ending like ing, or ins for plural per sentence, the child says.
So a higher MLU means more complex sentences.
Right. An MLU of 1.0 is mostly single words. When it starts climbing towards 1.5 or 2.0, you know they're consistently using two-word phrases and starting to figure out basic grammatical rules. It's a really useful quantitative way to track that leap into syntax.
Okay, so this whole process, sounds, gestures, words, grammar, happening so fast, it's no wonder there are different theories about how it all works.
Absolutely. It's one of the big debates in developmental psychology. How do they learn something so complex so quickly, often with pretty imperfect input? There are three main schools of thought.
Let's take them one by one. Theory one, infants need to be taught. This is the behaviorist view.
Yes, rooted in B.F. Skinner's work. The basic idea is that language is learned like any other behavior, through reinforcement, imitation, and association.
So the baby babbles something that sounds vaguely like mama. The parent gets excited, repeats it, gives affection.
Exactly. That spontaneous babbling gets reinforced. Skinner saw parents as expert teachers, constantly providing models, rewarding approximations, and linking words to enjoyable daily routines. Want your bottle? Yummy bottle.
And the implication is pretty direct. Talk to your kids.
Very direct. If you want children with good language skills, according to this view, you need to talk to them frequently, read to them, actively reinforce their attempts. It emphasizes the role of nurture and direct instruction.
Okay, that makes sense for learning specific words, maybe pronunciation. But does it explain everything? Like how kids create totally new sentences they've never heard?
That's where behaviorism struggles a bit. It's hard to see how simple reinforcement explains the ability to generate grammatically novel utterances. Which leads us to theory two. Social impulses foster infant language.
Also called social pragmatism.
Right. This theory shifts the focus from external rewards to the infant's internal drive. It argues that humans are inherently social creatures, evolved to connect. Infants communicate because they have this powerful innate need to interact with others.
So the desire to connect comes first, and language is just the tool they learn to achieve that connection.
Precisely. The core of early communication isn't about learning dictionary definitions. It's about understanding and conveying emotional messages, sharing attention, participating in social routines. The focus is on the pragmatics, the social use of language.
And because that social drive is universal,
Infants are highly motivated to learn the specific linguistic tools, the words, the grammar that their particular culture provides to allow them to engage in that social world effectively. It explains why they pick up the specifics so readily they need them to belong.
okay, that emphasizes the why, the social motivation. But then there's theory three, which feels quite different. Infants teach themselves. This is the nativist view.
Yes, most famously associated with Noam Chomsky. This perspective argues that language learning is fundamentally innate. It's not primarily taught, nor is it just a byproduct of social interaction.
Chomsky argued language is just too complex.
Way too complex and acquired way too fast based on the messy, incomplete language input children actually receive, to be explained by learning theories alone. Children figure out deep underlying grammatical rules they're never explicitly taught. They overgeneralize rules in ways that show they're deducing patterns, not just imitating, I got two sheeps.
So how do they do it, according to Chomsky?
He proposed the existence of an innate language acquisition device, or LAD. Think of it as a specialized neurological toolkit, a sort of universal grammar module in the brain that's specifically designed for language learning.
Pre-wired for grammar.
Essentially, yes.
Yeah.
Language, in this view, is experience expectant. The brain expects language input, and when it gets it, the LAD activates, allowing the child to rapidly acquire the specific grammar of the language they're exposed to. Learning language is seen more like a process of biological maturation. Like learning to walk, it unfolds naturally given the right environmental triggers.
Wow. Okay, so we have three powerful theories. Taught, behaviorism, socially motivated, pragmatism, and innate nativism. They all seem to explain part of the picture. Where does that leave us?
It leaves us needing a hybrid conclusion. The modern consensus, really, is that no single theory holds all the answers. Each offers valuable insights, but the reality is likely a complex interplay of all three.
So different theories might explain different aspects or maybe different stages of language learning.
Exactly. You could argue that early word learning and pronunciation might lean heavily on behaviorist principles, reinforcement matters. Understanding context, turn-taking, the reason for communicating that seems well explained by social pragmatism.
But the incredibly rapid grasp of complex grammar, creating novel sentences.
That's where Chomsky's nativist ideas about an innate predisposition seem most compelling. The truth is likely that infants use multiple cues, attention, social interaction, innate biases, statistical learning all together. Different parts of the language system might even have evolved differently, requiring this multifaceted approach.
So it's not one magic bullet, but a combination of teaching, social need, and an incredibly prepared brain.
That seems to be the most accurate picture we have right now.
Okay, let's try to pull this all together then. We've covered a huge amount of ground in these first 2 years.
We really have. We started with the infant as this eager scientist, equipped with core knowledge, actively testing hypotheses about the world.
Then we walked through Piaget's sensorimotor stages, from basic reflexes, through exploring their own body, then objects, then purposeful action, and finally, that leap into mental experimentation.
We tackled infant memory, moving past amnesia to see that they do remember. But it's fragile, needing context, motivation, and those crucial reminders and cues for retrieval.
And finally, the language explosion. Starting before birth, tuning their hearing, moving through babbling and gesturing, hitting that comprehension gap, then the naming explosion, and finally piecing together grammar, explained by a mix of theories.
It really underscores the sheer speed and sophistication of development in this period. By age 2, they've gone from helpless newborn to a walking, talking, thinking individual who has already laid down the fundamental structures for future learning. The eager mind truly is astonishingly effective.
So here's something to leave you thinking about, tying back to that early specialization, particularly in language. We know that ability to distinguish all language sounds narrows dramatically by age 1. What if exposure to different types of languages early on, say, one that's very noun-focused versus one that's very verb-focused, doesn't just affect their vocabulary, but actually shapes the fundamental structure of how they categorize and process the world later on?
It's a fascinating question. Could growing up learning a language that emphasizes actions and relationships from the start lead to a cognitive worldview that prioritizes dynamic processes, while a noun-centric language fosters a focus on static categories and objects? The very grammar you learn first might subtly influence your default way of thinking about reality itself.
Something well beyond just the words they learn. A really interesting thought to chew on. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the remarkable first 2 years. We'll see you next time.